Hello and welcome to today's Cybersecurity at a Crossroads Challenges and the Way Forward webinar brought to you by Insight. I'm Amanda Sharp from Insight. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. This webcast is designed to be interactive between you and the presenters. The webcast console you are looking at can be completely customized. You can resize or move any of the windows that you have open. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. All questions from this webcast will be captured. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please visit the webcast help guide by clicking on the question mark icon below the presentation window. The help guide covers common technical issues. Today you will be hearing from Jason Rader, National Director of Network and Cloud, Mike Sprunger, Senior Manager of Cloud and Network Security, and Rob Parsons, Practice Director, Network and Integrated Security. I would now like to turn over this presentation to Jason Rader, who will be facilitating today's discussion with Rob and Mike. Jason, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Amanda. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We're really excited that you're here with us and to talk about this topic that we all think is pretty interesting and to share some of the data that we've got back with you and some comments that we've got related to it. A little bit, and thanks for the great introductions of the team. Mike and Rob and myself will be working in and out of each slide, so it's not going to just be a slide presentation. It'll be kind of a discussion with some slides in the background. And a little bit about the methodology related to the survey that we conducted last year. It actually ended up early December of 2020. And kind of a little bit about the methodology that we use. So, you know, of course, and we all worked on this with actually a larger team, and thanks to the team for all their efforts related to that. You know, we really wanted to get the opinions and the insights related to a lot of practitioners that are out there. This is typically director level and higher. A lot of C-level folks, CIOs, CISOs, and CEOs responded to various small, medium, and large enterprise organizations responded. And, you know, what we were really trying to look for is basically their posture from a security perspective, their confidence levels in that posture, how the, you know, in 2020, by the way, congratulations, everybody, we made it. But looking back on 2020, kind of where we were when we actually started the survey and where we ended up in 2020 is an interesting journey in and of itself. But we were interested in the kind of the where people were headed in 2020. And this actually, like I said, finished in December. So we got a lot of great insights related to the work from home aspects that was going on, a lot of the challenges that folks were having related to that, security posture in general. But, you know, obviously we can get so much from the bank of questions that we ask folks to participate in, and then a little bit of insight related to our interpretation related to that. So that's how we're going to kind of proceed, talk a little bit about those aspects, the state of security, and then our key findings and takeaways. And then I think we'll end up with basically like a round table at the end where Rob and Mike and myself will kind of talk about things, because I think, you know, when you have a survey, you kind of have an idea of what you expect the answers are going to be. And now that we got those answers, what do we think based on those answers, what the next steps are for the folks out there that are right in the middle of all this. So that's how we'll finish up. By the way, the survey that we'll reference over and over again throughout this session is available at insightcdct.com. If you hit our website there, one of the banner ads right in the beginning will take you to the dedicated page for that, where you'll be able to download different iterations, full survey, and then bullet points related to that. If you want to share it with your own organization, please feel free to do that. So let's get a little bit in. I think, you know, one of the interesting things we got to kind of set the stage with that I kind of already mentioned. 2020, it says in the title of the slide, is an understatement, basically, highlighted the magnitude of the security challenges that our clients face. You know, we did enter 2020 upbeat with still a lot of security work to do. We ended 2020 a little beat down, but having to have adjusted quite a bit from a security perspective. But like I said, and I think we all kind of echo these sentiments, we're really excited that we made it through, and now we're just trying to deal with what the new normal is and how we move forward. Something that is without question, things that we're continuing to deal with regardless, is that data is everywhere aspect. That perimeter is gone, and especially with the work from home aspects that happened in 2020. we continue to have an issue with data being everywhere, and there's been some adjustments, of course. We heard a lot of interesting feedback related to that from the survey. Also, something that has been ever present and continues to be an issue related to security in general is the short supply of specialized security skills in the field, especially with the newer technologies that exist. And, I think the last survey that I looked at said there were about 500,000 unfilled security positions in the United States, and in Asia Pacific, 2 million. So we recognize that. We were going in with that understanding, but it only continues to get exacerbated with the release of new technologies and new initiatives that are going on. Security roadmaps, always been something that's been a craft that you have to do as a security professional, making sure that you're the right balance of the initiatives for the organization, the right acquisition of technology, and how the organization's able to ingest that. And then, of course, dealing with the technical debt, depending on where you were on that tipping point of going after those new technologies versus adopting those after the mainstream have already done the vetting of those technologies. I think, and by all means, this isn't the Jason show. I'd love to have Mike and Rob kind of weigh in on this. Any comments here, guys?
So I'll jump in, Jason. I think one area that I really feel like I bump into a lot, talking with clients or really anyone in the market, is around the technical debt component. So, you talked about the early adopters versus the laggards and, who's really in the middle. But there's really another definition of technical debt that we like to look at as well, and that's really around how you're adding complexity when you add new capabilities to an environment. And yes. The fact is, because of 2020 and the rapid change that we went through, there was a lot of technology that was implemented with the intent of gaining new capabilities, which was fantastic. The complexity that we added came at a faster rate than the capability. So we ultimately have a challenge from that technical debt perspective that we need to close in 2021. And we recognized a lot of respondents to the survey were struggling with that they put a lot of technology in place, that they were ultimately trying to tackle the needs of their organization as the world changed, but they needed resources in place to be able to operate and manage technology that they put in place, and ultimately try and find a level to some degree as they come out of 2020 and into 2021. How do we kind of balance the capabilities and complexity that we're all dealing with? So that's something that really sticks out here for me, and I know that I hear day in and day out as we work with various client organizations to navigate their 2021 world.
No, very well said and agreed. Mr. Sprunger, anything from you?
I'll add to that around in the area of security roadmaps. A lot of organizations are having a real challenge understanding how to prioritize what they want to do and when they want to do it from a security perspective. A lot of the controls have interdependencies, and it's just a lot of distraction around in order to be able to get some of the controls put out and the roadmaps necessary to support them, getting personnel trained, that type of thing, with the lack of ability to travel to get training. Some organizations have a hard time with that. So getting a solid security roadmap is not it's a daunting task, to say the least.
Well, no, that was a perfect setup for actually one of the stats that I think is the most significant in this slide that I just brought up. I think, again, the distributed IT landscape and the transition to a remote workforce, overwhelmingly, that created challenges for our clients in 2020. And I like to specify that this survey, the respondents had responded early December as we compiled those and then released them in February, March timeframe. But that took out any of the stuff related to some of the fun stuff that happened over the holidays. So actually that only made things more complicated, I think for a lot of folks. And then some of the newer things that happened as of late, I think only exacerbated some of these stats that I think we're looking at. So I just want to kind of level set everybody related to that. But, Mike, to your earlier point, this is one of those things, I think the majority of folks, so this first 3 and 4 respondents, 78% expressed a lack of confidence in their company's IT security posture and saw room for improvement in, and I think the area from a room for improvement, security roadmaps was at the top of that list. And I think to your point, Mike, I guess one of the things that just kind of shakes me, we approach things from a business perspective, right? Security is, we solve business problems with security, right? And I think that the aspect of feeling like you have a roadmap in place and know what you want to do anyway and have a plan to do it, yet leadership has a lack of confidence in the overall security posture. That's really frustrating. What do you have to say about that, Mike?
I think things change faster than roadmaps and strategies can be modified.
Sure.
Once you have a strategy in place, you typically execute against that strategy with the tactics that you have, or tactical responses and actions that are aimed at implementing and achieving the strategy in the long run. And oftentimes it's very difficult to change course in the middle of those activities, particularly when you have something that comes up very quickly in some form of a crisis or such as the problems we had last year. So I think it's a big challenge, and I think that's part of the reason that's driving the lack of confidence in the overall security posture, because the tactical initiatives either were in flight and had to be suspended, or there were a lot of issues around being able to fully execute the way that organizations wanted to execute so that they could envision their dreams and their vision and actually implement and see the results of their vision of what they wanted to see from the security perspective.
Yeah. And Rob, I think all 3 of these stats kind of support your earlier statement related to that complexity. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the roadmap and vision, how you pull that together, and then ultimately the technology and tools you think about, the technical debt we talked about, but also the infrastructure that was already there. Did you have the resources in place to operate it? And I know that another core component, we focused on security operations and also kind of the DevOps model to this. But I think that goes hand in hand with the skill set component. You talked earlier about the skills gap, which is nothing new to the security industry. There's been a skills gap basically since the beginning. And now we've got an opportunity, if I were to look at it that way, to say, how do we offload some of those easier tasks or those repetitive tasks to, development automation type environment so we can get the most out of the finite number of resources that we have. But all of that really feeds into our strategy and our posture and how we use our resources, whether they be technology resources or human resources. And that all feeds into the strategy. And I think at an executive leadership level, it's easy to look at how we're doing things or how organizations are doing things and say we could do better. And I think that's really the message here, is that we have room to improve.
Yeah. I mean, this almost maps to people, process, and technology. And I think, again, one of the things that we talk a lot to the C-level folks within different sized organizations, and that 78% still just hits me right in the heart, because I feel like a lot of folks at that level feel like they're making huge investments, and they definitely are making huge investments in their organization, but still to have that lack of confidence, to not feel comfortable reporting back to the board or whomever, the business in general, that really is frustrating again. And I think, trying to tackle these things, that there is a certain amount of unknown. I mean, when you have a technology-based roadmap, that's usually aligned with the business initiatives. You plan that out well in advance. There aren't a lot of surprises in there, maybe some budget changes along the way, maybe some new technology that's run in a very material way. So, again, no surprise, and we already kind of mentioned this before, that there was a giant shift, I think, to modernization of a lot of cybersecurity aspects. As we looked at it, and there's a lot more detail in the actual report. These are some perfect things to talk about for this discussion. But, I see a lot of folks, when I look at the ones that are kind of highlighted in this, they're really focused around if you had to move a whole bunch of users from the perimeter of your brick and mortar facilities to working from home or working from somewhere else, working remotely, all of these things kind of line up as far as the concerns where they made their investments within 2020. Would you agree, Mike?
I would definitely agree. I think that has been a much larger and more impactful problem than a lot of organizations really want to admit.
Yeah. And I think that shift to, we've got to get this stuff done. I remember I've tried to block it from memory, but I remember kind of where organizationally everybody was back in March of last year, and kind of the struggle that we got to enable these guys to work remotely. And, in a global organization, there's a lot of things that have to go down to facilitate that. And a lot of the things to that stat that's at the bottom, the 57% of businesses conducted a security risk assessment. Why we think that's significant is a lot of folks push those kind of proactive security activities that they would typically do that are part of their normal security mojo, if you will. They push those things to the side to kind of deal with hey, we've got to get this stuff just in time dealt with so that we can continue to keep the lights on and to, deal with the service or product that we provide to the public. That's a really important aspect. So not only do we have to shift, change, put a great deal of stress potentially on our people to adjust, we also kind of got a little bit out of our good habits that we have related to doing these types of things. Any comments there, Mike?
Yes, I would tend to agree with that. The big challenge there is when you have a crisis, it oftentimes changes the risks that you're facing. And if you don't plan ahead and project what those risks could potentially be in a variety of different scenarios, then you're not prepared to actually maintain your security posture. So, risk assessment is a proactive approach to being able to identify what the various risks you may be facing in your current situation as well as in projected situations.
Yeah. Any of these stats surprise you, Rob, on this particular one?
I think this really well aligns with everything that we learned working with our clients last year. But I think one point that's obvious here, but also interesting at the same time, is really what we've seen on the manufacturer side, the technology that has evolved as a response to the pandemic and what we experienced in 2020 and, things that are happening now in 2021. I think about like passwordless authentication is, a hot topic now, and it's not something that we really thought of before, but the effects of multi-factor authentication and the impacts on productivity and things like that have happened as a result of those technologies being put in place and being used in a remote environment have driven evolution in the technology that we're able to put on the table for our clients. And I think that it dovetails nicely into the needs that are here. So the manufacturers are listening. And obviously, we've got an opportunity to continue to optimize these environments so that modernization does happen as rapidly as possible, and we continue to help organizations to succeed in what they're doing.
Yeah. That was, our big kind of initiative rolling into 2020 was all around those kinds of things. And it's, those guys could not stop doing what they did. I think another stat that we talked about that looks kind of interesting on this is the bottom one, the staff expansion. Some people were like, oh, how come 40% of the people said that they're not going to expand their security staff? I think we had a lot of that had to do with the pandemic and the way that staff in general were kind of treated in 2020. I think when we look to the end of this survey, everybody kind of plans on augmenting their security staff in 2021 and beyond. I think, security and operations challenges, you mentioned this earlier, Rob, and I'd maybe like you to kind of comment on the first two here, and Mike, maybe you can take the second two, but, strengthening your security posture, it says 55%, so the biggest response was lack of automation. We typically think of that from a data center perspective, and an IT perspective, but security was definitely where these guys were responding to that. And then outdated network access control solutions, almost half of the respondents responded to that. Any comments there, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. So I look at the lack of automation. That's obviously a direction we're going in technology in general, but a direction that we have to go from a security perspective. If I think, just to take network access control as an example, a single security technology in a sea of security technologies in a client environment, the amount of alerts created on a daily basis or even an hourly basis are so mind-numbing that it really devalues the solution in a lot of ways. So being able to identify what's really important and to take the actions that are needed, but ultimately orchestrate and automate what's necessary, absolutely key. I think that, as a response to some of that decrease in staff that we saw, which was probably as a result of the pandemic and the kind of general contraction that we saw, but we still had the workload. We still had the security events to parse through. We still had the various effects of attacks on the environments that we had to deal with. So how did we try and figure out how to deal with those more effectively? And it was through automation. Now, I think there are some interesting stats, and if you want to go download the survey and take a look at the details, different segments are approaching the automation and the DevOps components a little differently. We saw more the enterprise side investing more heavily in automation, and where maybe the staff doesn't exist or is harder to come by. And then ultimately higher in the market, we saw a little bit less investment. So there's some details in the survey if you want to dig in there. Certainly from my perspective was interesting to look at that. And then, to talk about network access control, I think you have to talk about the edge. And we talk about the modern edge quite a bit here at Insight and what that looks like. And the fact is the modern edge has moved. It's in everybody's home office. It's in every coffee shop. It's in every cloud, every data center. And we no longer have that well-defined perimeter of the network that was, an access switch or a wireless access point or a VPN user that we used to have. We have to have this complex meshed organization and the ability to provide services to the modern edge, but then to also be able to secure them from a network access control perspective. So many of the legacy network access control solutions were focused on that network edge as we defined it before. And now we've got an opportunity to further evolve this technology and, talk about the posturing of devices and how we manage and facilitate what is deemed healthy or not healthy to be in an environment. So I think those components fit really well together, but I think huge opportunity for us to look at, again, how can we do security better inside the complex organizations that we all work in today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a great example. And Mike, I'll come to you one second. I just want to kind of comment on what Rob just said, because I think you made a great point there. We pushed a lot of technology out in 2020. When I think of NAC, I think of people that push that out in different phases, right? And I think that the same thing from the perspective of there's controls that we pushed out just to enable a certain capability to work from home, but now there's additional capabilities that we can enable within those security controls that add higher levels of security or more monitoring or more capabilities, and that's worthy of going back and take a look at. Mike,
yeah,
sorry to cut you off, brother.
There are so many different technologies that I feel like clients have implemented a minimum viable product, and we've got an opportunity to go back and look at how we can get the most out of those technologies. Maybe it's a technical debt conversation, or it's ultimately just looking at how do you manage the footprint of security and how many vendors or different technologies you have in place. So I totally agree, Jason. Sorry, Mike, didn't mean to cut you off either.
So when we stop and look at some of the problems that are out there with the legacy infrastructure and the tooling that present themselves, some of these solutions are have been around for a while. They have been updated with fixes and patches and that type of thing. But oftentimes they're not as functionally enabled as some of the newer solutions that are out there. Some of them do and don't support automation. And automation actually is one of those things that's key to being able to handle the flood of event data that's coming in. So the legacy things that are out there that actually either don't generate or can't see some of the more modern indicators of problems and issues effectively created an environment where an intruder could come into the environment and actually be invisible and not be seen or observed. And that's the ideal situation for a bad actor coming into the environment. The other side of that too is when you have a smaller security staff or team that is focused on the legacy tools. They're not getting the education they need or may not be able to get the education they need because of other circumstances. Now they're behind the curve as well, right? It's easy to reboot infrastructure and tools and technology. It's difficult to reboot the staff. Right. And so there's a lot to be said around staff training and making sure that they know how to get the most out of the technology that they're deploying so that they can then do things like the really cool automation that helps make their job a whole lot easier.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think all of these things flow into each other, just like you just said and just like Rob had said. I mean, I think if it says lack of skilled cybersecurity staff, so we can get people to do things on a basic level, but we want to automate those basic things because when we do have skilled cybersecurity staff, we want those guys doing the things that are what skilled cybersecurity staff need to do, which is not doing the nuts and bolts stuff that could be automated if we've got the right tool set in place. Mm-hmm. Thanks, gents. So I do think, there were definitely some positive indicators related to what came back. I mean, and there's much more than what we're showing in this slide deck. I mean, I think there's probably 4 times as many slides in the full presentation that you guys can download. And I also noticed in the Q&A, I just took a look at it. You guys aren't posting any questions up. We're happy to answer those in line. Please feel free. I know this might be just a riveting conversation that you're glued to, but if you do want to inject something, please feel free to, and we'll obviously open it up at the end to some traditional Q&A, but if you feel like something needs to be injected right then, please feel free to do that. On the positive side, we, 100%, the only 100% stat that we had in the entire survey of the respondents agree that boards and executive teams are more focused on the company security posture than they were in the past. There's all kinds of things I think related to that. Maybe the initial stat that we led with is that they have a lack of confidence in the posture of the organization, which means they're paying more attention because that's their job, is to make sure that the organization is secure amongst the other things that they do as senior leadership. But I think that the security in general is more important, and it's becoming more ingrained into the overall business process. And that's what the kind of 3 stats below support, in my opinion, where they're integrating incident response into the business continuity plan. Business continuity is something that we've been thinking about for ever, right? And then having incident response as a part of that instead of a separate thing that's just InfoSec's problem or cybersecurity, or depending on how you carve it up within your organization. Integrating cybersecurity into infrastructure and DevOps decisions, 3 things that absolutely should be together as opposed to compartmentalized within your organization. And then into the overall business operations. I think the 3 of us will definitely agree that security is part of those business decisions. And if the security team within the organization isn't supporting the business decisions with the right data to do that, then we need to rethink kind of how that team supports the business. Because we don't like security to be this giant hole that we can never fill with enough money to actually produce something back. So we don't want to just be this tax of the organization. We want security to be an enabler, to allow us to do those things, to allow us to go to market quicker, to allow us to develop quicker, to allow us to enable our users remotely, as opposed to something that holds us back. I know you're passionate about this, Mike. Any comments?
Well, I've always viewed security as being an enabler for an organization, and it needs to be something that enables the organization to be more competitive from an organizational perspective as well as from a market perspective. We're seeing evidence of security becoming a competitive edge in a number of areas, particularly in the defense information base that's out for the DoD supply chain. But, more importantly, for an organization, including security across the board in business processes, such as business continuity, crisis management plans, understanding how it plays in with infrastructure. It's all very important that it be integrated and not bolted on, because it's much more effective when it is integrated and taken into consideration up front than added on after the fact. That's been a thing that all of us have been fighting for a number of years. So it really needs to be an integrated approach. And quite honestly, I'm very happy to see the survey results reflect some of that.
Yeah. And Rob, I think, to your earlier points, do you find that when you're dealing with like a large transformational project, like the NAC stuff that we talked about earlier, do you find that it's more than just a single team involved? It's a wider range of folks throughout the company that are involved in the solution, or are you still just talking to these select groups of folks in the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Large NAC deployments oftentimes really pull groups from everywhere within an org. A lot of times when we're going through some of those, we're talking to the security side from a guiding principles or posture or security policy perspective. We're talking to the network side as far as how we implement or operate a solution, the desktop, the endpoint device groups to understand the endpoint components that might talk back to that type of solution. And then obviously business representatives of, how does my business keep operating in this security environment? I think one thing that's evolved in the last few years is really the perception around security, and that it's expected. The consumers of technology and organizations now expect security. It's really the iPhone generation where you feel like your data is on your device and it's private, and it should be that way by default. And so we've got that expectation, but we also have the expectation that it's completely simple to use, that it doesn't slow us down, it doesn't put us through extra steps or any sort of other challenges that may be necessary from a gatekeeping perspective or a sandboxing perspective to ensure security. So how do we give an elevated level of security while still maintaining that complete simplicity? And that, I think, is where the other groups come into play. And you're getting the business requirements of, you can't slow down my manufacturing operations. You can't slow down my users who are clocking into a time clock system that need to get to their station to do work. Whatever it may be, we've got to find that delicate balance between complete security and complete simplicity, and balance those two to drive a solution that's ultimately effective in a client environment. Beautiful.
Completely agree. Actually, some additional trends I think that are kind of valid. So again, please, insightcdct.com, grab the full survey, lots of good stuff in there. But these were kind of the, probably not a surprise after the conversation that we've just kind of had, is everybody seems to be, 96% of folks are increasing their cybersecurity budgets in 2020 and in 91 in 2021. So this was done in 2020. So everybody thought they were investing more in security, and everybody continues to invest in security. No surprise as well where they feel like they're investing. And, how do you invest in your overall IT security roadmap planning? That's an interesting thing. I guess that's a time-based thing, but I think those are where organizations like ourselves kind of can come in, help you understand and rationalize the tool set that you're trying to do, where you are, where the gaps are, what you're trying to accomplish. I think it's, and back to your complexity comments earlier, Rob and Mike, some of the things that you said, it's difficult, even with the best of breed technologies that folks kind of want to bring in, which when I think of roadmap, I think a lot about the technologies. A lot of people stick the technologies on there as well as the initiatives. But when those technologies are acquired, sometimes leadership, after they've got the PO issued and technologies there, that operationalizing that within the whole stack that we do to deliver security back to the business, that's not easy. That's also not a recipe that works universally. So that's a thing I think as folks figure out those roadmaps, and it's more than just that session of sticking it in a nice PowerPoint to show here's what we're going to do Q1, Q2, Q3. There's a lot of other things. And I think just in general, I think Mike's point earlier, acquiring that technology strategically so that it can report into your monitoring or your other systems so that it'll work. Any comments there?
I would jump in on that one and say that the best technology and the best tools that you can use for cybersecurity are the ones that you actually will use or are capable of using and consuming,
yes.
Right? I mean, it doesn't, I mean, you could go out and buy a high-end sports car like a Lamborghini or a Ferrari, but where are you going to drive it on the roads these days, right? And the same thing holds true with some of the tooling that's out there. You may go out and get a best-of-breed technology solution, but if you don't know how to use it and your staff doesn't know how to use it, and you can't get it running in your environment, then you've spent a lot of money and effort to put a tool in place that you derive no benefit from, right? So I think a lot of it has to do with get the tool you're comfortable with that meets your requirements and use it. Because if you don't use it, you're worse off than you were beforehand, because now you've spent the time and the resource money that you could be putting into other areas that would improve your security posture.
Yeah, and at the risk of kind of taking the conversation too far off of where we started, one of the things that I've found as we're talking to our clients in 2021, a lot of folks, and as I look down the line here, when we're talking about network security, vulnerability management, endpoint security, cloud security, a lot of folks are turning to what they think the answer is in some of these categories and looking for AI. Any comments there, gentlemen? I know I have my own, but I'll save them. Is AI going to save us? Because we kind of pivoted that automation seemed to be an important aspect. Is AI the same as automation? Is AI going to save us from automation, Rob?
I think that's an interesting discussion. I think that we continue to want to maintain a level of control, which leads us to more automation than AI. But at the same time,
I agree. By the way,
we see
not setting you up.
We see a huge and very rapid evolution of what's happening in the attack surface, what the attacks look like, and how do we respond more rapidly. And if you inject a human in there, you're always going to have that human delay. So I feel like there are some areas where we can start to use AI, and it can help us to respond more quickly from a security posture perspective. That's personally my take on it, and certainly interested in what you guys have. And Jason, when we're done with this kind of string, we've got a question that came in that I can hand off to you when you're done with the AI perspective.
Thanks. And all I was saying about AI, I think a lot of people get wrapped around AI that it's this thing that if I have network security with AI, I don't have to do that anymore. Or if I have endpoint security with AI, I don't have to do that anymore. And that is not the case, typically, from what I've seen. And those AI capabilities that are within those different product sets don't necessarily relate it to the other product sets that have AI. So it's not like, if I have AI here and AI here, I have AI across both of these things. Not at all. So I think it's one of those, it's a great buzzword. And when it's implemented in machine learning, AI, obviously there's a difference. But when those things are appropriately implemented within a product set, it gives you better results. Certainly within that, some of those things that a human would have to be the person that does with, that, deals with that intermediary. But I also think that there's just the truest automation is not some stuff that that AI is going to fix. It's just literally some stuff you need to automate, right? So I think, to your point, Rob, we got to continue down that automation path. Nothing's going to save us from that. I think some of the capabilities AI capabilities built into products are going to get us to that point we want to be at faster. But again, AI is not going to save the day, at least not yet. I'm looking forward to some capabilities that integrated across multiple platforms, but right now that hasn't happened to my knowledge. Anything from you, Mike?
Yeah.
I would just totally agree with all these comments, because AI by itself is not a silver bullet. It has to know it can take some of the drudgery out of some of the more mundane tasks that are out there, and coupled with automation can help move things along to a good conclusion faster. But at this point, I don't think it's going to be a significant enough or impactful enough scenario to be concerned about it right now. Yeah. A few years, yes, not now.
They're nicely complementary, right? So they've got an opportunity to work well together. And I think I completely agree, Mike, that we'll continue to find those niche spots where they work well together over the next few years. But ultimately, looking where that could go long term is certainly interesting. I think it leads in well to the question that was asked, which was, on average, how long would you say it takes organizations to establish or achieve some sort of security maturity, which I think is really interesting because security maturity is a moving target in itself. But Jason, I know you work with clients on a daily basis trying to drive towards that maturity. Do you have some metrics or data you want to share, or maybe some thought process that might help clients in going that direction?
Absolutely. Well, I think my joke is everybody has some security maturity. It just might be very low. That was a joke. But I think that as, the maturity of the organization and not just the tech is a gigantic thing that I think as we move forward is something that's definitely got to be brought up to the senior level. What we say a lot in the security space right now is the security group within an organization has to have a lot of influence without a direct authority over the rest of the organization. Just because you're the CISO or the CIO doesn't mean everybody's going to do what you say what you say they should do. So I think that's an interesting angle there. I do think that a lot of, from a maturity perspective, the quest in a lot of organizations is to get to that defined. So if we're talking, typically when we talk about maturity, we talk about these maturity levels. So there's a capability maturity model that loads of folks borrow from that's been around for, from a software development perspective for decades. But, that's that, can we do it? Initial, repeatable, can we do it over and over again? Defined, managed, and optimizing. And I think that I would wager there's pieces of our overall security operations that are defined, but the overall operations are not defined very well. From a cybersecurity perspective, and the way that you can test this, I think is a good way that you could test this, back to I think what Mike said earlier, is do a tabletop exercise or some kind of proactive thing within an organization and see how long. So a cybersecurity incident response tabletop exercise, see how well that goes. Bring in all of the stakeholders, executives, all the lines of business, and then walk through a cybersecurity scenario and see if everybody knows what to do or knows that they were supposed to do something. It'll be a good eye opener. And those proactive things, man, they save you such money and time if you do them on the front end rather than figuring it out when you're in the middle of an event. The stats are crazy. They're in the millions of dollars difference for that investment that you do in the proactive versus reactive. But, I can't give you, I'd love to, I can't give you like an average time frame, but I do think to transform an organization that doesn't think about security in a meaningful way to an organization that is truly going from good to great in a security respect, it's 24 months, 36 months. Literally those are, because you don't want, the security team can go to a, campsite and play guitar around a campfire and figure their part out, but making the rest of the organization come along for that journey, which is really what you absolutely have to need, especially in this DevOps world and in this, potential shadow IT respect of these guys need to get to market as quickly as possible. They're going to bypass infrastructure folks. And man, that creates a giant rift and security issue within the organization. It would just depend, but I definitely think there's something ahead of them related to that. I know, Sprunger, you have some stuff to say on this.
Oh yeah. I would suggest to you that attaining security maturity is actually more of a cultural shift within the organization, the entirety
Absolutely.
of the organization, than it is just with the security team or IT. I would also tell you from observation of looking at security programs for a number of years that maturity varies depending on the topic at hand. For example, an organization may have really strong change control mechanisms for controlling an introduction of change within the environment, whereas they may be lacking in other areas such as general policy. I can't.
That might be
begin
manufacturing
to tell you,
or something. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I can't even begin to enumerate the number of organizations that look at policy and it's like so it's policy, right? But the challenge is the policy are the rules that everybody executes against. And if everybody doesn't know what the rules are, you can't get people moving in the same direction. So maturity is going to vary depending on the topic that you're examining. And some areas will be stronger than others. So it's not a one size fits all for everything that you're trying to accomplish.
I think I changed the slide. I think it's a great kind of round table way to kind of introduce this, because I think that what we just talked about is a good topic as well. But, I think at the end of the day, we got confirmation for the most part of what we were thinking was going on. I mean, we've got a great cross section based on ourselves and our teams of what's kind of going on in the industry. We have that kind of unique view, which is good. And I don't think there were really any surprises with a couple of exceptions in the survey. And it just made it worse than we actually thought it was for the most case. But what I think, is a good place to be at this point. Okay, you confirmed all the things that you thought, guys. What do we do now? So I think what we just talked about related to security maturity, it's a journey, it's a cultural shift, and it's going to take more than just the security team. I mean, really, there's got to be an executive sponsor from the top down. And I do believe, here's one of my upbeat things, and based on that 100% that we had earlier, I do believe senior leadership, CEOs, the board, everybody on down wants to do this. I think that the security teams have to be more comfortable being prescriptive in what they need to do, what the organization needs to do, and to work that way. It's more than just that roadmap and how we implement security. It's how we, transform the organization, the way they think about security, to your point, Mike. Any other kind of, what do we do now, kind of approach things that we want to enlighten our folks? And by the way, this would be our Q&A time as well. So please, and thank you, by the way, for that previous question. Feel free to throw some other ones in, because if you haven't been able to tell, we love to talk about this stuff. So we'd love to hear some additional questions that we weren't thinking of. Any comments there, Spranger?
So, Jason, one thing I'd like to jump in and talk about a little bit is really around visibility and just the absolute necessity of it, especially as we've shifted to this work from home environment, or, we talk about a hybrid environment going forward in 2021. How do we achieve visibility around what events are happening on the network, what's happening from a security perspective? And this brings us to, back to a technical debt conversation a little bit about how you might manage all of the different security vendors that exist in an environment. And there's a couple different ways that I look at this, and some of it's my perspective, and some of it I think is just good general practice. But there's a delicate balance between the best of breed type of solutions and scenarios and a manageability and operatable type of solution. And I feel like it all comes down to the core tenet of visibility. Can you get visibility into what's going on in your environment if you have all of these best of breed solutions? And if the answer is yes, if you've got all the right APIs and you got the developers to integrate and dashboard and, automate the various tasks, then absolutely great. But the fact is, most organizations don't seem to have that, or don't seem to be able to consume that from an outside party. So it brings us back to a conversation of, how do I bring together the right pieces of technology? Maybe we've got some platforms and some best of breed integrating together, but maybe by doing that, we reduce the integration points, but we're able to leverage those integration points to be able to provide that visibility across platform to give complete view into an environment of what's going on. And I think that's something that's absolutely critical. And I think when we talk about some tips for mitigating risk in today's environments, I think about visibility and I think about how we might work to improve it through every application and every interaction between the humans that we have executing and the technology that we have in place. So that's just some thought process that I have, and certainly interested in your guys' view on that. But something that I deal with daily for sure.
No, I think that visibility is a perfect way to figure out what you're trying to do from a security perspective. There's preventive, detective, and corrective controls. And visibility isn't a preventive control, it's a detective control. So it's not worth the giant effort to put everything into these, but I think some recent frameworks that have been put into place, like cybersecurity framework and other things that are out there, is to just remind folks that there's categories related to these things, and you want to cover yourself across all the categories. If you were talking about this visibility at your own house, I just happen to kind of look out my window. We have a detective control in most of our houses where if a door opens after we set the alarm or a window opens, it's going to let us know. That's a detective control. Preventive controls are put the signs out front that say, hey, you've got an alarm, and the corrective control is calling the police or something along those lines, right? Visibility is hard because you got to figure out what you need visibility to. I can look out the window, but if I want to see out every window at the same time, I've got to put cameras up, right? And then I've got to have a place where I can see all of those. And that kind of gets to this place that we get when you've got a bunch of disparate tools that all have great consoles with great information, but it's a lot of information. And then I've got to look at all of these different things and make sense of those things, those correlations between the tool sets. If there isn't one native that you've got to do yourself, and either that's programmatic or a person that's got to look at two consoles and basically figure out what's going on, that gets rough. And then now that's where AI could really help us out. If you don't understand your organization, which window do I care the most about? Which room do I care the most about in the house? Those things get important. So I always kind of say, you've got to know thyself. If you were able to see absolutely every packet in the entire organization, would that make you safe? Probably not, because now you've just got a giant haystack of needles, basically is what a lot of people say, where you've got so much stuff to look at, it doesn't make any sense to you. So it's really not just buy all the tech that lets you see everything. It's what are you trying to protect? What skill sets do you have? What can you do yourself with your own teams? What do you want some other team to augment? Because I mentioned call the police. The police are a perfectly viable option. I do not need to acquire the same tools that the police have to correct actions within my home. However, there's going to be a better response time if it's something in my home versus outside of my home. So those are the kinds of things that folks have to practically look at across the entire operational aspects of security. And that's, again, that gets us so far out of operation sometimes that we just don't ever find the time to do it, or we hope we can figure it out after we've acquired the technology, and it gets rough. That's where folks like us can kind of come in, use some experience, kind of show, also, you don't have to get to nirvana on the first step. It's a roadmap that you can have that gives you this capability, and then this capability, and then this capability, while other folks are while we move some other responsibilities externally. As you can tell, I really care a lot about this, but the sad thing, I'd love to say, if you just do steps 1, 2, 3, done, but that's not typically how it ends up. Mr. Spar?
Yeah, and I'll jump in here and try to avoid the use of the technology word here, but it really gets down to what capabilities do you really want to have? What do you want to accomplish? Do you want to heat up a can of soup? Then just about any kind of pot or saucepan will do. But if you want to do and string together a number of capabilities to be able to increase your visibility or be able to improve your response times or whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, then you have to be able to string things together and understand what capabilities you have, and then build the roadmap on how you're going to get there from where you are, right? And the effectiveness of all of that is really what maturity is all about. right? Getting back to the question around maturity, maturity is a measure of this, of what you're doing, not of what you're doing, but effectiveness of what you're doing. And part of that effectiveness is understanding what your risk surface looks like. What risks are you most concerned about? Which ones are you not concerned about? If there are risks that you're not concerned about, but are still out there, you go out and buy cyber insurance for those to cover off on the potential that those are going to happen.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, that's transferring the risk, and it gets into a risk management discussion. But I think a lot of it too gets down to being able to discuss with executive leadership, boards of directors, the capabilities and what it is that you're trying to accomplish in terms that they understand. Those groups are very astute business leaders. Their education and their training has them focused on solving business problems, of which security is a risk management problem. So, but we can't go in and start talking to that level of ownership using a lot of acronyms and jargon, because then we lose the advantage we have in being able to describe what it is we're trying to accomplish. So there's a lot to be said around effective communications as well when we're going through some of these exercises and mitigating a risk for an organization.
Yeah, and I think, whether or not an organization needs to provide the security back to themselves, whether it could be outsourced or something along those lines, that's definitely a decision. I don't think the board of directors cares if our company delivers security, our own security. What our board of directors cares about and our senior leadership is that our stuff is secure. However, we can guarantee that with the right amount of cost related to the right amount of risk that it mitigates with some assurances, obviously. I don't think anybody would argue with that. So now the question is when you don't know what you've got or where things are or the data that you need to protect, and so you're going to bring in somebody else to secure it all for you, that makes things harder too. So it's kind of a know thyself perspective. I don't want everybody to think that there's absolutely no way to do this, because I know I made it sound very complicated. The point is, a lot of these platforms, and I think Rob mentioned this earlier, we kind of platform plays in public cloud or with certain vendors who have a wide, cover a very large part of the security tool set, if you will. Those are better for organizations that, if you want that AI to work across multiple products, that's where the platforms come in, right? If you want a single pane of glass, and there really is no such thing, but if you want as close as you can get, the platform plays are way better for that, right? So I think you've got to figure out which portion of that. First of all, know thyself, know what you're trying to protect, and then figure out you don't need full packet capture all the time. That's for a certain group. You don't need attribution. I don't need to know who's attacking me. I need to keep them from doing it. But some organizations, governments, military, they need to know who's attacking them. So it's a whole different shift depending on what you're trying to do. So that's why there's no macaroni and cheese recipe for this. I say it all the time. But I do think that as organizations start to figure out that cultural shift that needs to take place organizationally, it'll change the way they think about security as well, because having teams work together, infrastructure, dev, information security, audit, compliance, all of those teams kind of working together is a way better approach than having everybody try to figure this out on their own with separate initiatives and separate products sometimes within the same organization. Any other questions there, gents?
I don't see anything in the chat. Must have nailed it.
Or everyone's asleep. But either way, thanks for being with us today. And, again, super passionate about this. I mean, I was really grateful for the folks internally and externally that helped us work on this survey. Grateful for the respondents that filled it out, and grateful for the results and our ability to share that with you guys. We're very passionate about this here at Insight, and we understand the need that our folks out there have to solve this problem. And unfortunately, it's going to be a problem that we're solving continually. It's not one that we could fix and be done with it. So our understanding of that technology, the vendor landscape, the the processes that need to be put into place, that consultative approach, that business outcomes that we're trying to strive for, these are the best ways to kind of solve these problems. We're very, very fortunate to have a large team that figures these kinds of things out. But that's, our commitment. We do a lot of these kinds of things, not because it's our job, but it's because this is what we do even in our spare time. So I think that it's exciting to work with folks like these gentlemen and our teams to be able to do what we do, but it's not easy for sure. And we understand what you guys are going through out there as well. So our ability to provide any insights, no pun intended, back to you guys is important to us as well. Any final words from you, Rob?
Just thank you for the opportunity to share this data. I agree with Jason on the components, thankful for the opportunity to pull together the team, to look at this information, to, really understand where organizations and our clients are in the market and what they're struggling with, what they're planning to do. And ultimately, thankful for the opportunity to be able to help them to navigate, basically uncharted waters as we continue into 2021. So thank you for the trust you give to us, and happy to help continue playing that role.
Thanks, Rob. Mike, any last words?
The only thing that I would suggest is that anybody listening to or reviewing the webcast realize that better cyber hygiene is a journey, right? It takes patience, it takes perseverance. It's not something that can be attained overnight, but it is attainable. So
yes.
Start with the basic blocking and tackling, make sure that the foundations are set. And then it's like building a house. Once you have a good solid foundation, the walls go up, and then you start doing the things to make a house a house. And that's the important thing. And many of the organizations that we encounter haven't even established a good solid foundation for their security posture. So start with a good foundation and then go from there.
Well said. And I'll just end up by thanking the Insight CDCT team. Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks, Amanda, for all that you guys do to support us, production, directing, stage management, all of those things. And I'll turn the time back over. Thanks so much, everyone.